Well, it is 6 o'clock and we have quite a bit of ground to cover. So I definitely want to make sure that we have enough time to engage in the dialogue. Hello to everyone that's on the call. Greetings to my co-panelists. Very excited to kick off this inaugural Diversity Dialogues and Intersections dialogue session. And so our first dialogue session will be the story of race. So thank you all for joining us. So the diversity dialogues that we have in play are about advancing conversations that matter. So this DCRC dialogue series offers a simple, social, and structured way to practice communication across differences while building relationships and understanding. This is adapted from an organization, livingroomorganizations.org. Today, our dialogue team will engage in a 90-minute dialogue in which we will take turns sharing and learning from each other's experiences concerning race and ethnicity. We will create brave spaces to normalize conversations about race, connect, heal, and inspire our workforce to advance racial equality for all. After reflecting on our conversation, at the end of our dialogue, the team will open the dialogue up to participants to share reflections of the conversations that they have witnessed. So again, I welcome you all to the dialogue. So, why we are here today. This is a first of a series of rounds where we will be introducing ourselves. So we will share our name, where we're from, and what drew us here today. I'll start off. My name is Niger Thomas. I am a native Atlantan, a native of Fulton County. And what drew me here today, as the Director of Diversity and Civil Rights Compliance, it was very important for me to be able to create the opportunity and the space for our employees to have conversations about race and ethnicity, but also to have or learn more skills about how to do that in a healthy and constructive way. So that's what drew me here today. Julia?
Hi, I'm Julia Padgett. I am also an Atlanta native. And what drew me here is just that it's very important. It's one of the most important discussions we could be having, especially right now. And I hope that we can build connections with each other and further understanding of each other. And Donald.
Thanks, Julia. My name is Donald Sequeira, and unlike Niger and Julia, I'm not a native of Atlanta, even though I feel that way because I've lived here for over 24 years. I'm originally from Mumbai, India. And the reason I'm here is because I think America right now is at crossroads, and being a first-generation immigrant, first-generation American, I think for too long we've swept things under the carpet, and it's important for us to have a healthy, transparent dialogue so that we understand this whole issue much better. And that's why I'm here. Kimberly.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Snotty George. I was born in Corpus Christi, but I've lived in 7 different states. I've lived the longest in Northern California and now Georgia. Why I'm here is that when I first relocated here, which has been some time, I struggled with diversity here in Georgia, moving from California. And I felt a separation between race relations. I enjoyed the Southern hospitality that I received, but then there was just this block of, not being able to get close to different people here. So as I continue to learn about other experiences and conversations like this, I welcome it, and it provides growth. So that's why I'm here. Victor.
Good evening, I'm Victor Simmons. I am the library administrator for the Auburn Avenue Research Library, and I am from the Bronx, New York, born and raised. What drew me here is there are very few opportunities to have open discussions about race and diversity, and having the opportunity to just openly speak about it freely with so many of my peers was something that I really wanted to take part in. Nicholas?
Yes, hi. Thank you, Victor. My name is Nicholas Rodriguez. I'm a branch group administrator with the Fulton was born in the Dominican Republic and lived in New York City and Miami. And I've lived in Georgia now for a little over 10 years. Part of the reason why I'm here is, to learn more about race and to learn more about the dynamics of what's happening today in this country. And also, because in my native country, there are some complex issues also with race. And I think being part of this dialogue would also help me understand what's happening back in the island. And let's see, I think Todd?
Thank you, Nicholas. My name is Todd Williamson. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but my father was in the military, so we moved around quite a bit when I was growing up. Spent a big chunk of my early schooling in northern part of Indiana and then in Virginia. So I call Virginia home, and now we've lived here, and my family's lived here in Atlanta for 12 years. And part of me being part of this conversation, I want to learn about myself a little bit more. And I think learning about yourself can lead to some understanding of me, of my family, and how we perceive ourselves in our community. And I want to be a person who can be a servant leader in our communities as well. And that's why I'm here today, to learn a bit about myself and hopefully make some changes in our communities and our world.
Thank you so much. Has everyone had an opportunity to speak? Show of hands. All right, thank you so much for sharing. So now we'll talk about how we'll engage. And what's unique about the structured conversation that we're having today is that it requires the adherence to conversation agreements. And so we will read those aloud shortly. But before we do that, I do want to begin the session by sharing with you the disclaimer language that we have been asked to communicate throughout all of the programming. So I will start each dialogue off introducing this disclaimer before we move into the conversation agreements. So Fulton County government is an equal opportunity employer encouraging diversity and inclusion. The videos, documentation, and other resources for this program, including this dialogue, are for educational and informational purposes only. Any views expressed therein represent the views of the speaker and/or author and do not necessarily represent that of Fulton County and its employees. So now with that, we can jump right into our conversation agreements. So Julia, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So the conversation agreements, there are 6. The first one is to be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives. Number 2, show respect and suspend judgment. People tend to judge one another. Setting judgment aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruption. I know that one's hard for a lot of us. Number 3, note any common ground as well as any difference. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others. And number 4, be authentic and welcome that from others. It's very important. Share what's important to you. Speak from your experience. Be considerate of others who are doing the same. And number 5, be purposeful and to the point. Again, that one's hard for some of us. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you're answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants. Number 6, own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation and the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like the timeout sign if you feel the agreements are not being honored.
Thank you so much, Julia. So the The symbol that we agreed upon for ensuring that we're honoring these conversation agreements at all times is the timeout signal. So we will all be free to use this timeout signal and then help redirect the conversation back. As it relates to our purposefulness and being on point, we agreed to use this symbol if the time is elapsing and we need to move on. So those were the hand signals that we've agreed to use during our session today. All right, so now we're entering our first round, and this is getting to know each other. So in this round, we will take 10 minutes to get to know each other by responding to a series of questions. So each participant can take 1 to 2 minutes to answer only one of the following questions. So I will kick us off. What sense of purpose, mission, duty guides you in your life? I would have to say that the sense of purpose or mission that guides me is definitely being a public servant. That has been something that even as a little girl, I think I always aspired to want to work and to serve. And out of all the career opportunities that I've had, it's been nothing more important to me than being able to serve and give back to the community. Victor?
Okay, thank you. So I think my purpose in life and what kind of guides me is the idea of being able to give back. Growing up in the Bronx, New York, growing up in part of New York City housing, I've seen a lot in my time, and having the opportunity to not get an education and hold the position that I do have today, it has always been one of the key things in my life was how can I give back to the community in which I come from. And though I'm not in New York, I see so many similar communities here in the city of Atlanta, in the county of Fulton, that give me that opportunity. Julia?
I think I'll answer what would your best friends say about who you are, just because they love to tell me that I'm honest, and sometimes they like to tell me I'm too honest. And I'll own that, and I'm okay with that. I think that someone recently just said to me that that to trust means to be true over time, and I'm okay with that. And I think that that honesty is something that I'll gladly accept. They'll probably also say that I'm quirky, and I think overall though that I would care. I care about not just my friends or family, but the community around me. I think that's what led me to my job as a librarian. Again, I think Niger mentioned public service and Victor giving back. I think that's why so many of us are probably here right now. And now I'll turn it over to Nick.
Okay, thank you, Julia. I would like to answer, what will your best friend say about who you are? And my best friend will probably say that I am first Hispanic and that I lived in Miami. Then my best friend will probably talk about my personality. He would say that I am a very patient person, respectful to others, and I would hope he says that I'm a loyal, trustworthy person. I would hope he says as well that I'm level-headed, calm, and collected. I like to talk to people one-on-one. I like to connect with people. I like to help people, and that is one of the reasons why I went into this career of being a public servant and working with people, with the public. I think I've chose the right career, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone. Like me, I consider myself an introvert, but I would still recommend this career to people that are that care about others, and I think that's how that would be described. I will turn it over to Donald.
Thanks, Nick. I'm going to take the first question since I guess the others are all partial to the remaining two. While I was thinking of the second one, but I thought my great answer would be the first one. I think one of the big things that I've noticed in the family situation, the community, or even for that matter, the country, is the ability to accept dissent. Today, we've kind of gone very polarized, be it the family or the community. Everybody seems to have an opinion about everything. And thanks to Google, we seem to think that we have all the knowledge. So my greatest hope and concern for my family, community, and country is that we learn how to accept dissent in a fair manner. And as Julia earlier said, learn to listen, because there are times that we will understand the other person's perspective only if we listen. Empathy is a big important. So for me, the greatest hope and concern is that we learn to empathize with somebody who may have a different opinion from us. That's my greatest hope and desire. We got everybody. Todd, what do you?
Thank you, Donald. As I was looking over the questions, and you jumped ahead of me here, because I was going to talk about the hopes and for my family. I'm married. I have 3 children. All my children are adults, so they're ranging from the ages of 20 to 28. And I want my family to still remember and to think about that and feel deeply loved, whether it's by me, other family members. And that we continue to grow closer with all of our relationships. And I think all of us want that. I don't think that's unique to me. I want them to enjoy life, and I want them to dream as well, too. And all of us have talked about being servant leaders as well in our communities. And I think that something that was instilled in me when I was young through my parents, and it was clearly instilled, from my grandparents to my parents as well too. And I hope that I'm doing just a good job at that, sharing that responsibility with my children as well too, and even other folks in my family, whether it's my nieces and my nephews as well too. I want them to be servant leaders in their communities, and think of the greater good of the whole and not just of themselves as well too. And I think we're still waiting to hear from Kimberly as well. Kimberly?
Yes, hi. I'm going to go with the third question, the sense of purpose and mission and duties that guide my life. I guess being a whole person is important to me, mentally, spiritually, and physically, and growing in each of those areas. Also having a strong work ethic and achieving goals, that's very, and feeling that I'm giving back to the community as well as my family and friendships. So that's basically, for me, what kind of guides me in my life. And I think that's it. Have we answered everyone? I think so.
All right, thank you all. So moving into the very next round, our round 2, and this will be exploring the topic. So we'll be spending quite a bit of time here. This is where our actual dialogue will begin. So of course, we have the opportunity to view, and for all of our listeners out there, a video by Dr. Bainbridge that was titled The Story of Race. It's a PBS digital short series, The Origin of Everything. And so that is provided as the framework for some of the knowledge that we'll talk about that we've learned, in addition to some of the definitions I will share with you now. So for the purposes of our dialogue today in this conversation, we will begin to have this conversation around race and ethnicity with the following understandings. So in the American context, race and ethnicity are complex terms that are often used interchangeably. For today's conversation, the terms are separated to designate race as a biological quality and ethnicity as a cultural phenomenon. For this conversation, we will focus on race as it is commonly defined. So they provided a few common definitions that have commonly been referred to define race. So the first one, a grouping of humans based on shared physical or social qualities into categories generally viewed as distinct by society. A group of persons related by common ancestry or heredity. An arbitrary classification of modern humans, sometimes, especially formally, based on a combination of various physical characteristics, such as skin color, facial form, or eye shape, and now frequently based on such genetic markers as blood groups. Last, a socially constructed category of identification based on physical characteristics, ancestry, historical affiliation, or shared culture. So now that we have at least a basic framework for the definitions that we'll use to discuss both of these concepts, we can begin. So the first, or in this particular round, we'll each take 2 minutes to answer one of the questions below. We will answer without interruption or crosstalk. After everyone has answered, the group may take a few minutes of clarifying and following up for questions and response. We will continue exploring additional questions as time allows. So I will kick us off. The question that I will choose will be the last one here. Were conversations about race a part of your upbringing? If so, how was the subject approached? How did the people around you talk about other races? So I'll take the first part of this question. Were conversations about race a part of my upbringing? And initially I thought no, but then I took a deeper, I explored that a little with more depth. And what I realized is that conversations about race were very much a part of my upbringing, but they were in the form of storytelling. And it was in the form of my parents telling me about what their experiences were growing up. And the one story that I remember most vividly was my mother describing a church burning that had taken place. My parents, both of my parents are from South Georgia, in a small town right outside of Albany, Georgia. And so it was probably September 1962. There was a significant push for voter registration in South Georgia at that time. And for the churches that were supporting that initiative, getting everybody registered to vote, they were burned. And there were 3 churches that burned in that area in 62. And one of them was my mother's church, her home church. And I remember her telling the story of getting up that morning to go to church. And everybody had piled into the car and they were on the way. And I say they probably got maybe a mile or so away from the road that you would turn onto. This is a dirt road. This is a very small town. And the heat and the flames from the burning were so intense that they couldn't turn down that road at all. And what I remember her saying was being afraid. You know, I think, and seeing that through the eyes of a 9-year-old. And she talked about being afraid to go back to church after that. So she would sit in the car. She wouldn't go in there. And those were the stories. It wasn't a direct telling per se, but they were just the stories. And so that's how those conversations began. How did people around me talk about race of others or other races? I don't recall. You know, that's interesting. I don't necessarily recall that because again, it was just this perspective of story. So race was something that I learned you had to deal with. But that's all I knew. That's how those stories began. So I will turn it over to Donald.
Thank you, Niger. Appreciate it. From my experience, having grown up in a different country, race was a non-issue. We had a whole set of different problems. So when I came to this country about 27 years ago, uh, I didn't even think about race being an issue until I started getting into the workforce and I realized that there were things that were not exactly the way it should be. However, my memory of race has always been a very positive one because having grown up being literally colorblind as far as race is concerned, it's always helped me to basically navigate myself by looking at people's content of their thought process. But at the same time, having worked with people of different race and ethnicities, I realized it was also important for me to understand where they were coming, what kind of experience they came, so I could empathize with them better, so I would be able to understand and deal with them much better and not be judgmental. So for me, while it's been a positive experience, it's also been a learning experience that I had to understand the settings that they came from. So I don't sit in judgment and say, why are they behaving in a particular fashion, or why do they react to the same situation that I would react differently? So for me, it's definitely a learning curve, and I think I'm so glad for that, because otherwise I was in this bubble that I thought that the whole world was perfect. Kimberly, what are your thoughts?
Okay, yes, I'm going to take the question, an early memory of race, or actually what a powerful memory of race that informs how I navigate relationships. Basically, growing up in Northern California, I landed in San Francisco, but I moved north to Santa Rosa, and I am a military brat and had moved several different times. But when I moved from San Francisco to Santa Rosa, we were able to actually count how many Black families there were in that town on both hands, and we knew each other. But I had the experience of actually integrating a private school and having that feeling of, okay, I'm the first girl, a Black girl in this school, in middle school. And, it was the memory of it negative or positive? It was actually both. Especially at the beginning, was very negative. People, wondering why I was, where I'd come from, why, just questions, a lot of questions. But I had a friend, we became friends later, but I had a person that she and I avoided each other. It was a very small school when we avoided each other. And then we had two friends that in common. And then those two friends left after 8th grade. So it was just the two of us. And we actually became friends, and I was able to answer a lot of the questions that she had because I found out that I was her first Black friend. And to this day, the positive part is that we're still friends. But being a 12-year-old girl at that time, it was very uncomfortable for me, and it did not feel good. But, that was that experience, and I was able to navigate it. It has helped me with other experiences as well. Julia?
Thanks, Kimberly. I don't want to not answer a question, but I'm going to go back to conversations about race as a part of your upbringing, because I think Niger and I are the only two Southerners on here. I could be wrong about that. And definitely Atlanta natives in this conversation. But absolutely, I grew up in Atlanta, and at first I went to a predominantly Black school. So, and then my parents later, that school was going to close, and they moved me to Woodward, which Woodward Academy, as you may know, and at the time, then I didn't have any Black friends because I only had 2 people in the class, and I was very uncomfortable at first, and I don't think my parents understood, but I was actually very nervous around all of the white kids. I mean, I wasn't accustomed to it. So it was a different kind of conversation and a different perspective, I guess, but they did have to talk to me about that. And then also just racism, because around the same time that I started going to Woodward, they bought an old building in Alabama. And on the way up, you know, we all, in the back of the station wagon, I would look and see, I'd always read the billboards. And, you know, I kept noticing these repeated letters, KKK, and I had no idea what that meant. And so I asked, and that was an absolute conversation that then my parents had with me, because they had to then explain what that meant, what it represented, and a lot of just the stuff that I think is unfortunately and sadly, especially in the 70s and 80s and definitely before, when I was young, that was part of living in the South, and especially outside of Atlanta, it was more dominant. So yes, conversations about race were absolutely part of my upbringing. And I don't think we've heard from Victor yet.
Okay, thank you, Julia. So I'm also going to take that question. So for me, growing up in New York, we didn't really have conversations about race in my household. Though coming from a mixed couple, my dad is Black and my mom is Puerto Rican. We never talked about it because we didn't focus on the differences. There was so much similarities between the 2 cultures that it just felt the same. And in New York, where this huge melting pot, it's that way culturally, but not necessarily racially. It's very segregated racially. And so culturally, you know, and I've mentioned this to the group in the past, is that we looked at people as not white or Black. They were Jamaican, they were Irish, they were, you know, Italian, more so than any specific race. Yes, you know, if we base it on, you know, popular opinions, then they would be white and they would be Black, and we'd lump everybody in a thing. But for me growing up as a kid, it was never any of that kind of lumping people into a certain group. So, you know, how did people around me talk about race? They really didn't. It was really, if you had something negative to say about the other person, it was going to be more about them culturally than it would be about them their actual skin color or any of those kind of physical traits. So, Nicholas?
Yes, thank you, Victor. I would like to answer the question, what is an early memory of race? As I mentioned earlier, I was born in the Dominican Republic, which is an island in the Caribbean. The island itself is divided in 2. So 2/3 of the island is occupied by the Dominican Republic, which speaks Spanish. And 1/3 of the island is occupied by Haiti, which is it was a French colony, and they speak Creole. My earliest memory of race is seeing people of different colors, different shades of brown, Black, some Indian-looking Dominicans. In fact, when I first arrived to New York City, that was my first port of entry to the U.S. My Dominican passport had my race listed as Indian, which is something that is no longer done in the Dominican Republic. But in those days, if you were brown and your hair was straight, they would say you're Indian. Thinking of the old days when there was a native Indian population when the Spaniards got there. But I remember in amazement seeing the people, the first time I saw European tourists or Caucasian tourists, I was pretty amazed to see that they're such white skin and their blue eyes and the blonde hair. We didn't have those extremes in the Dominican Republic, but we had different races. I remember in my street there was a Lebanese person that lived there. They had a lot of Lebanese people come to Latin America, and they will settle in Latin America because some of them were Christians, so they were able to kind of fit right in with Hispanic cultures. But I also remember in my town there was a Chinese family that owned a restaurant, so I got to see a little bit of diversity. But I guess the negative part of that interaction of races that I saw was that they were Haitians also that would come, in those days they would come and usually would go and work and then go back to Haiti. But I remember that there was a lot of, even back in those days, a lot of animosity between the Dominicans and the Haitians. Although we look alike very much, they were still slightly different enough so that Dominicans can differentiate them. And of course, when they spoke Spanish, we can tell. So I came to the U.S. with knowing that there were lots of different peoples and different races. But one of the things that I noticed once I came to the U.S., the Haitian people that were in New York City were as equal as any other Dominican. We were all immigrants to this country, and we were all under this new American land, this new American way of life, and that was a very positive thing. I like to say that, unfortunately, the animosity between the Dominicans and the Haitians remains to this day. And I hope that by being part of this dialogue and these conversations, I can learn more about the dynamics that are going on here and also compare that to what is still happening in the island. So I guess we have all gone. Has Todd, have you?
Thank you, Nicholas. As I looked over these questions, I want to answer the question about an early memory of race and a powerful memory as well. As we, met each other a couple weeks ago and started some back meetings to prepare for this, I shared a memory with everyone that I had an African American teacher in the 2nd grade and in the 5th grade, and this would have been in the late 70s and early 80s. And that's when I think I first remember race. We lived in Bermuda for a while when my dad was stationed there with the Navy, and I was too young to understand the difference between the natives on Bermuda and the Navy folks that were stationed there. So I think my 2nd grade teacher was Mrs. Newell. She was an African American woman, and I don't remember much about her. And when I looked at this and started thinking about an early memory, I do remember her as my teacher. I remember my 5th grade teacher a little bit more, and that was Mr. Nathan Spicer. He was a family friend of ours. He and my dad were on a bowling team together as well. And I don't know how that happened. I think that happened after my brother and I started going to the school, and Mr. Spicer, and somehow they met. He ended up being my 5th grade teacher. He ended up moving with me to middle school as my assistant principal as well. So when I got in trouble, Mr. Spicer would say, "You should probably tell your father what happened at school today before I see him at the bowling alley tonight." So, so different, dynamics there when you have to go home and you say, "Dad, I got to tell you something," and he says, "Get in the car." And as we're driving to the bowling alley, then we all sit together. But those were, and I think about it now, pretty fond memories of certainly Mr. Spicer, because it ended up giving me the understanding that African Americans are leaders in our community, and I learned that at a young age as well. I didn't have many African American teachers after that, though. So I can remember one in high school. I don't remember any in college, and I'd have to go back and really think about it as well. And certainly, I don't know if that situation is unique for me or unique for everyone. And even through middle school, when in my classes themselves, I don't remember having an African American teacher other than Mr. Spicer being the assistant principal there. So I had an initial, introduction with them, and then it just kind of, I don't know, fizzled out. I don't know if that's the right word for it as well. So that was an early memory of race, and a powerful one, because again, like I said, it just showed me that African Americans are leaders in our communities, no matter where we're looking.
Okay, have we all had an opportunity to share? I believe Todd rounded us out. So now we are ready to do our follow-up questions and responses now that everyone has had an opportunity to speak. So anyone is next. I'll open it up.
Niger, as you were telling your story about the church, and clearly that is a powerful memory for you and your family, and certainly not unique to yourself. That's happened throughout the South. Does your family still talk about that? Is that a story that is still shared with your children, your aunts and uncles, your nephews, your nieces, your cousins? How is that story shared today? And is there a context today that you can relate that to?
It's interesting. It is, because they rebuilt the 3 churches that burned. So my mother's church was Mount Mary. And it was Mount Olive, and I can't remember the other church, but they rebuilt those churches. And it's interesting because it became a part of history, because at the time, the baseball player, Jackie Robinson, happened to be in Albany when the churches burned, and they did a tour of the churches. And so when they went to the ruins of the church, my mom had the opportunity to meet Jackie Robinson and Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King came later, and they all toured the church burnings. And so for her, she just recalls, feeling, I think, so in awe just with the time and seeing those leaders there. And the fear, I think, that she had, because my grandfather was very active in voter registration. So it was a dangerous time for him. So she talked about those fears. And so those are the stories. And we get to go back to the church. That's still the home church. It's still there. People still go there and worship. I go there. So it's like a living history that's there. So yes, we share those stories, but a lot of it is just about resilience, and even the diversity of effort that went into fighting that type of terrorism, because the freedom riders were very much a part of that era. So my grandparents would house freedom riders, and they were from all walks of life. And I think sometimes when I reflect on that history with them, that's what's interesting, is just the sheer diversity of it. And so there's a sense of the human spirit that just runs through even in that story, because it becomes a much bigger story about bigger community, all the people that wanted to address those things. So yes, it's very much part of that story. For my family, for that community, it's a part of their history. So it's very much in the oral tradition, for sure.
I have a question for Kimberly, and this is also a question for all of you. I mean, growing up, we don't really see us different from the other kid. We just look at ourselves as kids. And when I looked at both Kimberly and Julia's question, she didn't even realize that she was perhaps white. She just realized that she was a kid. And Kimberly was the same way. So when was that realization dawned on you that, wait a minute, I'm different because of maybe the way I look versus the way, that I'm in. And that's something I'm trying to understand. When was the first time that realization dawns on you that people treat you differently just because you look? Was that in your early adult life? Was that in your child life? So maybe Kimberly or Julia or anybody else wants to share. I'd like to understand that.
Yeah, I'll start. It's funny. When I went to kindergarten, the first thing that I was told about going to school was about my last name, and everybody's going to laugh. So I had to prepare for snotty more than my color. So, But anyways, we really, you know, I guess being in the military, and I talked to my mom about this. Why didn't we talk about this? And my parents, you know, they grew up in Texas. They had Black and Hispanic friends, and they grew up in those areas. And it wasn't until I think they reached employment as a teacher, my mom a teacher and my dad, you know, on the lieutenant colonel track as a quartermaster. He probably dealt with it there in those places, but didn't want to speak to us about it. It wasn't until we started, you know, studying history, learning about the slave trade. We were in Jamestown and Williamsburg and reading Sounder. That's when we started asking questions. You know, the autobiography of Jane Pittman, you know, those Raisin in the Sun, I went to see that, and those spurred the conversations. But my mother did, when we did start having those conversations, she started talking about her experience in Texas, in Corpus Christi, integrating a school. So those are when those conversations started to happen. And they probably, maybe about 4th grade, 5th grade, at that age. And then when we were, you know, I think when I did move up to Santa Rosa, when they really hit you in the face, and I was like, wait, I'm seeing less of people that look like me. That's when those conversations really started happening. Julia?
And I know for me, Donald, it was, it honestly was going to Woodward when I realized the difference, because as you pointed out, I definitely didn't see the difference when I was at Jerome Jones. And then it became a stark contrast when I suddenly realized, you know, Woodward was very different. And that's when those conversations, I think my parents realized maybe they had made a mistake, because we didn't prepare her for this huge cultural shift. And I do like to remind them that they like to do that a lot in my life. But yeah, so I suddenly went to this school that was predominantly white, going from a predominantly Black school. And that's definitely, I mean, it's almost the day that I walked on to the Woodward campus is the day that I was like, oh wait, there's something different here. And yeah, so that's when those conversations happened. So I think I was, I think 9 at the time, 8.5 or 9 years old, around that age. So, and I really want to, I love what Donald and Nicholas and Victor said, just because the three of you, if you could talk, because I mean, Donald, for you especially, it seems almost like you said, I think you said even almost that it was like a perfect world. I mean, that race wasn't an issue, and I find that fascinating. I mean, it really is, it's just a completely different thing. And I know with Nick, he said it was more like Haitian and Dominican, and the rest, you know, those were the two things. And with Victor, and I love him pointing this out, it was more like someone's Jamaican, Italian, or Irish. It's not really about necessarily their race, but their, you know, the nation that they're kind of ascribed to. So I would love to hear just more about that, because it's very different from my experience.
Another follow-up question to that, is it different for men versus women? So I want to ask Victor this question. I mean, we tend to handle things differently. And Victor, I just want to understand, New York is a melting pot, just like Bombay was a melting pot for me, for people from different parts of India. We almost thought we were different countries out there. From a man's perspective, how does one deal with it growing up? I mean, were there fights over it, or what was happening?
Well, one of the things that kind of goes back to what Nicholas was saying when he was talking about the relationship between Dominicans and Haitians, it actually made me think of something that I had forgotten about for years. And it kind of deals more with the idea of like maybe colorism with a hint of racism. And I remember being in high school, and there was a young lady. I thought she was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She happened to be Dominican. And I remember, because I went to school with my stepbrother, and we were in high school, and I was like, I built up the courage. I was like, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to talk to her. And at the time, mind you, I had a full head of hair. It was really curly because I'm half Puerto Rican. So in many cases, lots of Dominicans thought I was also Dominican. So I make my way over to her, and I start trying to do my best smooth talk to her, and she listened. She listened. And I thought I actually had a chance, and she outright just said, "I can't date you." And I'm like, "Well, why not?" And she said, "Because you're Black." And I remember, like, the first response out of my mouth was, "You look just like me." It's like, but you look just like me. So if I'm Black, what are you? But then, that I realized that was kind of like the little bit of dejection there, like, oh goodness, So I remember walking back to my brother and being like, man, she told me, she couldn't date me because I was Black. And he was just like, and my stepbrother is a Puerto Rican, full on Puerto Rican. And he was just like, what? He was probably more upset than me. But I thought about it, and I was just thinking, like, at that moment, I didn't see a difference between her and myself, but she did. You know what I mean? And I was thinking, I remember saying to my brother, I'm like, my Spanish is not great. I was like, well, if I spoke Spanish to her, maybe. He was like, nah, she wasn't gonna date you any which way. And I was like, man, and just thinking about, like, that was my first instance of seeing another person of color be that way towards someone who looked exactly like them. And I hadn't thought about that memory. And mind you, I love my Dominicans. So I didn't hold that against Dominicans overall, again, but it was one of those things that I had to realize that culturally it was different, and that's where that came from. Her culture told her she couldn't, and though we looked the same. So I think as a man, it was, dealing with that kind of thing. I don't know, it just, again, it's that if you're constantly growing up in an environment where you think it's all about culture, but other people keep telling you it's not, it's about color, it's something that's hard to grasp. And I think that even to this day, I'm still kind of dealing with that.
Well, that's interesting that you're kind of talking about the qualifications that people use to determine a person's race. And so for Donald, we were talking about colorism, and I wrote a question down. Aren't there like caste systems if you're darker and lighter in where you're from? And then for instance, my daughter's high school language teacher, they look like twins, but as soon as she opens her mouth, she is French. She speaks French, but had I not gone up, spoken to her, I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't have the accent. So, I would have made an assumption first by visually looking at her and thinking that she was Black and from here. But as soon as she started speaking, I was like, oh yeah, she's heavy French, So, but I wanted to ask Donald more about, living where in Bombay or Mumbai. Tell me where you're from again.
From Bombay, it's now known as Mumbai.
Mumbai.
Yeah, it's known as Mumbai now, but when I grew up, it was Bombay. And like the big cities, like Victor was saying, it was more a class society based on your economic status, perhaps. We had the issue on the caste system, which was based on your ancestors' profession. So basically, the people at the top were the ones who helped you to worship the gods, were the Brahmins. And then you went down, then the rulers were the Kshatriyas, were the kings. And then you went to the middle folks were the merchants, and then the people who do the menial tasks. So, but in the bigger cities, you don't see that kind of stuff because it's very difficult to distinguish between, because we're all of the same race, so you can't distinguish unless you mention your last name, then perhaps you can get it. But then again, India is a melting pot for all religions. For example, I grew up from a different faith from the majority, which was, being Catholic, we're in minority, but we don't have the caste system because all that we had was a different religion. So India also has a set of problems where, thanks to the British ruling us, there was always a premium given to somebody of a lighter skin. That was an issue by itself, and I never understood how that came, because they detested the British as ruling us, but at the same time they liked that lighter color. So it was a different set of problems. But at the same time, growing up, we belonged to a community that was educated. So I almost like to call ourselves, we were fortunate or blessed to be born in the right family. So we had the education. So we didn't have to deal with those issues. It was only when I came to the United States, I realized maybe in about 4 or 5 years later that race was a reality. It was an issue that I need to be aware of, and I need to also talk to my children about it, since they were born here in the United States, that this is something that's real, and one needs to be cognizant about it, because sometimes we tend to be judgmental, especially if we see a young man or young woman struggling. We forget that they didn't have the same privileges as us. So we need to reach out and perhaps mentor. So I've taught my children to go out and mentor in schools that have a lower affluent, probably a different race, but go out and help out and make sure that they can have the same opportunity as you. So it's a learning curve for me especially.
Yeah, I love this. The dialogue is so rich. I want to follow it with everybody. Nicholas, I think Nicholas and Victor, I definitely wanted to follow up with you as it relates to language, because there was something that I believe it was Nicholas that said that you could tell based on the type of Spanish that was being spoken, sometimes who was who. Can you unpack that a little more and just kind of tell us a little more about that story of the distinction as it related to language?
What you mean, like among Hispanics?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we all speak Spanish, south of Mexico, south of the border, and we a lot of times we look the same. However, the different countries, they have different accents. So we can, when we speak to another Hispanic, we can tell pretty much where that person is from. And we speak the same language. We may have a few different words here and there, like local words that they use in one country as opposed to the other. But we understand each other quite well. But we can tell immediately if someone is from Cuba, if someone is from Argentina. The accent is very different and distinct. We Caribbean people, we speak a very fast Spanish, and we don't pronounce a lot of the S at the end of words. We substitute sometimes the L for the R, or we can throw in Dominicans use a lot of the letter I, a lot of the endings of words with the letter I, which they don't know where it comes from. They think it might have come from when the Portuguese brought slaves from Brazil to the Dominican Republic. Those slaves, they spoke Portuguese, and they used the letter I in a lot of the ending of the words. But it's just a local Dominican thing. But the U.S. has been like a melting pot for the Latinos, and it's not very uncommon, especially in New York City, where you see a lot of couples, Dominicans with Puerto Ricans, or in Miami you see a lot of let's say Venezuelans and Cubans or Dominicans and Colombians. So it's become a real melting pot for us.
Yeah, I saw Victor shaking his head.
Yeah, because it actually, it gets even deeper. I mean, definitely when you're in New York, when someone's a Dominican based on how they speak Spanish. My father is an African-American man, but he speaks Spanish fluently, and he will speak Spanish to you in a Puerto Rican accent, and then he would also speak Spanish to you in a Dominican accent. He does them very well. But it made me think about my mom, because my mom is Puerto Rican, and even within that culture, there is a difference. So my mom was raised in New York. She was born in Puerto Rico, but raised in New York. So they're New Yorkers, and the way they speak Spanish is different from those from the island. So when you meet someone from the island speaking Spanish as opposed to someone speaking Spanish in New York, it's a whole different thing. I mean, I laugh at my mom all the time, because I'll just say, "Hey, Ma, how do you say this?" in Spanish. And then what she'll do, and it's similar to like in like Japanese culture, how they won't create a new word for something that already exists. So it's like baseball is baseball kind of thing. So my mom would sometimes say an English word, but with a Spanish accent. And I'm like, that's not how you say the word in Spanish. But she's been so accustomed to going between the two languages that it's this kind of like different thing. And she can, she'll gladly tell anybody, about her family on the island and how they treated her and her family coming from the city, from New York City, and going back, they treated them differently because their culture was different. They had similarities that they maintained, but growing up in New York City created a whole new set of cultural differences. One of the big things in New York, what's a bus? If you say autobus, no, it's a wagwa. And they say, why is that? It's because that's the sound the bus made.
Wow, really?
Right. It's strange.
That is amazing.
I got to tell you about language. When my kids were born and raised in America, they have this unique ability to change accent when they talk to their grandparents in Indian English. They quickly move from an American accent to an Indian English accent. And I've never figured how they do it. So that way their grandparents can understand them, because otherwise the grandparents would say, you're talking to me with a thick accent so beautifully. I've never understood how they've done it, how they do it. And then they go back to their friends, they're back with the regular American accent. They kind of have a switch, they flip it.
Wow, that is fascinating. We're at 7:00, so before we move, we have a few more minutes for maybe another round, a short round of follow-up. I'll ask one more clarifying question. This one is for Todd. I was really intrigued by your experience as you talked about growing up and having the experience with a teacher of color, and then as you grew, you didn't have those same experiences anymore. So what was that like for you to have had that experience and then suddenly you notice that you don't have it anymore?
Yeah, it's hard to think back because I haven't thought about this before. And so, it might take me a little bit more time to kind of decipher things. I might need to talk with my brother a little bit more as well about it, because certainly we shared the same school and the same teachers. And I wonder, his experience might be totally different from mine. Although I know that we had the same fifth grade teacher with Mr. Spicer. My brother had him, and I thought, I'm not going to get him. They're not going to put me in the same class with Mr. Spicer. And they did, and I was so thankful for that. But yeah, thinking back about it, again, I cannot remember then having an African-American teacher until I was in the 11th grade. And that would have been my U.S. history instructor. And she was magnificent. But I don't remember anywhere from 6th through the 10th grade of having an African-American teacher at all. And I could go back and look at your books if I can find something to see, but I just don't remember it. And clearly that's a loss, and if we look at, today we talk about the importance of, our African-American young boys and girls having an African-American teacher when they're younger, and that makes a big difference in their lives. And it certainly made a difference in my life. And if it made a difference in my life, it will make a difference in their life as well too. So, and it's something that I still need to with them to think about, and like I said, decipher through it as well. And Victor, I just want to let you know, as you were telling your story, I thought of Romeo and Juliet, and I thought of Tony and Maria. So your story is not unique. It's been told for 400 years. So you're not in a situation all by yourself.
It's a Shakespearean tragedy.
Yeah. Sorry. So, well, clearly you had a happier ending than Romeo and Juliet did. So, I don't know about her, but you did at least.
That was a good one. We can
even go with Jack and Rose for the Titanic. So we can go, into the 90s even, because clearly they were star-crossed lovers as well too. So.
We've got about 5 more minutes within this particular round. So I'll just say one thing, and anyone that wants to take the 5 minutes, I think all of the revelations we had are powerful. We can talk about it in the reflections piece, but I wrote it down, Todd, when you said that there was a sense of loss. I think that's pretty powerful. I don't know if I'd ever thought about it that way before, but it is, because I had, it made me think about my own experiences where they were very limited. So I have very little exposure to just people from around the world. It was very limited in my upbringing. It wasn't until much later. And it is a loss, because think of everything that you miss. Think of all the things and all those experiences that you don't even have the stories to tell, because they're just not there. So that was pretty powerful. Thank you all for sharing that. Anyone else?
I just wanted to mention, I saw that Allison Pacheco had mentioned the soda and pop and how people have regional terms for certain things. I'm from New York, I eat heroes, not subs, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's true. It's the same within. So there's so many. The thing that was striking about the mentioning of the soda versus pop, or jeans versus dungarees, that kind of thing. That's a whole nother thing. But thinking about that kind of the levels in which, as a culture here in America, we can make those kind of like distinctions and basically either accept someone or write them off based on that.
Yeah.
Me being a northerner in the South, certain people have preconceived notions about that. And oh, here comes the New Yorker trying to come down here and steal our jobs. But all I'm trying to do is live a nice life.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where there's so many levels to it within our culture, within a Puerto Rican culture, because I grew up, my mom told me all the time, my grandfather, who I never had the opportunity to meet, was not a fan of Black people at all. Mind you, he was my complexion. You see, so it's a strange world we live in. And again, in the case of Puerto Rico, and similar to in the case of India, is there's always that injection of this idea of what is right. The lighter you are, the better you are, and there's this, it kind of creates issues later on in life, and culturally and generationally, where it's hard to unpack those kind of issues, especially when you're not having conversations about it, so
Right.
that's why this is a nice moment for us to have this kind of talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say that I feel very fortunate that my first American experience was in New York City, because I got to tell you, I did not experience racism in those early years in New York City. I think the first time I experienced anything that would be described as racism was when I left New York City in other places. And it was a great place to experience America, because there were so many different groups, so many different races. Like Victor mentioned, we were not really, we were described a lot by the Italian Americans, Chinese Americans. It wasn't. It was more. They do have neighborhoods. They do have people they live in their different areas, but it was more of well, your group congregates here and your group congregates there. But I did not experience the kind of racism that I later on got to see in other places in America.
Wow, that's really fascinating, because I'm a Southerner, a Georgia native, Atlanta native, been here all my life, and it's interesting to kind of hear about the experiences, particularly with Victor. And with Nicholas, where you're thinking about color and what the distinctions are and what the treatment, will be based on that. And my grandfather, was biracial. And he was biracial, black and white, basically. And he fit in nowhere growing up. And so there was no place for him. I mean, he was ostracized everywhere. And you know, that's kind of the interesting story, I think, when you start thinking about color and those relationships, because he literally had no group. And as much as kind of the trappings of race and having to be in these categories, it just feels burdensome to me, you know, because I'm speaking for myself, right? Because we have all these identities within us, but then you end up having to choose. And sometimes even if you really want to choose, you can't, because you don't fit into whatever people's understandings are about what it means to be in that group. And then so you don't have a group. You know, that's really, I offer that out, not even as a question, right? I'm just kind of thinking about what you were saying, and I never really reflected on that, the experience of my grandfather being biracial at a time where I guess you really weren't supposed to be biracial. That category was not even supposed to exist. So it's interesting to think about how color influences those things, even within the culture. Yeah.
Well, Nigel, you had said that you know, he didn't have a choice, and he today still we have folks who are biracial who don't have a choice. They are told what their race is, and that could be from family members themselves. It could be from their classmates, their schoolmates, who dictate you know, where they are as well. They don't have a choice in it themselves, and you know, let's hope that changes sometime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hope so. I think reflecting back on my grandfather, for him it was extremely difficult because I mean, people treated him as if he were white. I think he was someone that you would say looked white. You know, I would get when he would come with my father, maybe pick me up from school or something like that. People would tease. They would tease me, you know, saying, you know, well, who is this white man picking you up? That kind of thing. And he struggled with that, I think, because he really, with the outward appearance of one thing, but then you have a family appearance of something else. He was never really able to reconcile that, because I think I know how he wanted to identify. You know, that part was clear, but it just was not accepted for him. And so that, as I was listening to Victor, and even Nicholas kind of thinking it through, it's like you can even want to identify in one way, but then you don't necessarily get that choice because people are putting that on you. You know, they're going to put you in that box, whether you like it or not.
So it makes me wonder, in other countries, say Europe, if you know how you have a form and you have to check white, non-Hispanic, or, you know, African American, if in those countries they have those same things, or are you know, in Europe, are you just French, or what part of Europe are you from, or what? I think we kind of talked about this a little bit in the past. It's like, if your skin is that on the application, you know, black, French, or from, you know, those sort of things come to my mind. I don't know. These forms that have been created here in the United States for us to check off the box for biracial. What do you choose? Do you
What box do you check? Yeah.
Do you check
I think it's
by what you look like or what you identify with?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Oh, I think it's definitely an American thing. You know, I remember, I think I shared this with Nicholas some months ago. There was a podcast talking about how on the census in Puerto Rico, they confused everyone by putting in those boxes of what are you? Are you black? Are you white? And everyone was confused because to them, they're Puerto Rican. Of course, there is racism in Puerto Rico, but it's not one of those things that you define like that. You know what I mean? And that happens, I think, a lot especially in the Caribbean, in the Spanish-speaking countries, where they're Dominican, they're Puerto Rican, they're not those broken up into these other little categories. And I remember listening to that podcast and thinking about, in my household, growing up with my grandmother, I was never told to pick. It was like, hey, you're all of the above, you're just all of it. Me personally, as a small child, I instantly felt that I was a Black man, but I knew culturally that I was Black, American, and I was also Puerto Rican. And I couldn't take, either one away because they were both a part of my upbringing. But I can see how your grandfather would have a difficult time, especially back then, finding some, where do I fit in? Fortunately for me, I feel like I fit in on both ends. But maybe that's a difference in just the mix.
Yeah.
Because it's an easier transition. Than just being, a product of a white and a Black relationship, especially in this country.
Yeah, I sometimes I wish he were, we are going through difficult times now, and I think we historically do, but I think in addition to going through difficult times, I think creating formats like this does give us the time to connect across, and I wish that he had lived to experience that. To see that we can reach a place where we can share these experiences with each other, and not share just that they happened, but how they made us feel. What were the impacts of that? So I'll take progress in any way we can make it happen.
Nigel, one of the things that, since I was not born here, I chose to become an American, and it took me a while to make that decision, even though I was eligible for probably more than 10 years before I decided. But I decided that, do I really want to be an American, or was I happy being a resident in the United States? And when my wife and I decided to be an American, we decided we don't want to be hyphenated Americans. We're not going to call ourselves Indian American. We're just going to call ourselves American, because we decided this is going to be our country. This is where we owe our allegiances. This is where we pay our taxes. This is where we perhaps going to die. And for me, that's very important. And therefore, I don't subscribe to this concept of hyphenated. I'm trying to understand that better. Maybe somebody can explain to me, where did this hyphenated African-American terminology come from? Because I don't hear that being spoken about other races much, other than perhaps in New York, where they call themselves Italian-American. But other parts of the United States, you're just American, and then you have African-American. You don't hear too many hyphenated other than that. And that's something that I've really come to understand. How did that even come?
Oh man, if we did not have to move on, I would love to unpack that history, because there's a lot there. We have 2 minutes and then we have to go. But I will say this, because I do think you raised an important point. For many African Americans, and even as I think about my grandfather and speaking for myself, you don't know where you come from.
Correct.
There's no way to trace back to anything, because if you're tracing back, what ends up happening usually is that it goes back to a landowner of sorts. And so you really have no connectedness to a particular place. And that's not everybody, because I'm only speaking for myself. Some people are able to trace back further than others. So the whole history behind that was just trying to find some level of connection and belonging to something other than a color. And then because of the stigmatizing of color. And so for a long time, that was the only title you had, was colored. There was no other place of origin or connection for you or anything. So it had a very meaningful purpose for some. Not everybody ascribes to that. Not every person of color ascribes to that. So it's definitely not something that's applied universally. But just to give that very basic explanation, because there's really so much to unpack. Like we would probably need a dialogue just on that. Like, I'm not kidding. It's really just that involved. So we can unpack that outside of the dialogue, and then we can maybe come back and share a next dialogue, because that's a critical question and there's a lot there. We just don't have enough time to unpack it the way that it really needs to be unpacked. So we're at 7:20. So I'm going to roll us to the reflections piece so that we can go ahead and make sure we open up for our callers, or everyone who's on the line. My apologies. So for the reflection in the conversation, this is round 3. This is our final round. And so we'll each take a minute or two. We'll choose one question as it relates to what our reflection will be. So everyone will pick one question, spend about 1 or 2 minutes answering that question. And I'll throw it open to the group. So anyone who wants to go first can.
I'll start for us. Looking at the questions, what was most meaningful for me, and it's the easiest one because it's the first one on the list, but I think the most meaningful, and I'm hoping that other folks agree with me, is that just thinking about the commonalities that we all have. Our stories are a little bit different, but we all have some kind of common connection somewhere, whether it is with a family member, whether it's with communities that we grew up in. We can make that connection somewhere down the line. So, I did not grow up in New York City. I've never been in New York City, but I can see and I can understand Victor's love for that city. I don't know how long he's been in Atlanta now, but I can tell that he loves New York City, and he valued the time that he lived there, and it made him who he is. And all of us are in that same boat. So I grew up in Northern Indiana, and I grew up in Virginia. Those places made me who I am today. And I think all of us are in that same situation, no matter where we're from, whether it's India or the Dominican Republic. We all have that commonality.
I totally agree.
I found it interesting that Julia and I had opposite kind of experiences, similar, but it was kind of reversed. And then also just learning about Todd and the having a African-American teacher. I didn't have one until college. And I know I would have valued having such an experience. So that's, really great. I don't think anyone in my maybe my younger sister did, but not my older as well. So I think that was pretty interesting and informative, and gave me a lot of information.
For me, it was, just thinking about and I've mentioned this in our own conversations, was thinking about the similarities as opposed to the differences. And as we all continue to tell our stories and to talk about these incidents and experiences in life, we see so many similarities within that. When we start to realize that if we focus on the similarities, we can go a lot farther than when we focus on on the negative things that separate us. Outside of that, we're a group of individuals right now on a Zoom call, who all work for Fulton County. We have that in common. You know what I mean? That's the starting point. You know what I mean? That's the starting point. And, when we stop, thinking about what makes Donald different from myself and what makes Julia, not to discredit the differences, because that's what makes them them, and that's what makes them interesting to me, but it's those things that kind of throw everything off, because if you're not like me, that means that, we have to keep you at a distance. And I really wish that for anyone who's watching this or anyone who watches this in the future, is that they take that similarities into account and realize that they can probably create long-lasting friendships like Kimberly did.
I want to kind of jump on a little bit of what Victor was saying, just because it is we're you know, if nothing else, we're all human. Um, and you know, we have that one common link between us. And to me, it's finding out. It's fascinating to me how actually different we all are, but ultimately, I think we're striving for the same thing, which is understanding and connection. But the other thing what I really took away, and because now I just went down this rabbit hole because I'm thinking about forms. And now I'm just like, maybe our next step should just be to get rid of the question on the forms. I mean, is that like one solution to the problem, is just eliminate trying to define? Because for so many of us, I mean, even just here with this small panel, there's no way to just answer that question simply. It could take 3 hours for us to sit down and talk about really who we are and how we should be defined, even just in terms of race, because we all have, I'm sure, rich backgrounds. Our ancestors are all like, we don't even know. I don't. You know, I mean, we all have so much stuff going on with us, and now I'm in that headspace of just get rid of the question, man. It might help, really, seriously. But I do hope that next steps will be Donald asked such a great question. I mean, why, you know, where did the hyphen come from? What does that mean? I mean, like, to me, those are the next steps, is to just keep going, you know, and keep letting the conversation progress. The more we talk, the more we understand.
Yeah, for me, in terms of next steps, I think it's very important for us to continue these conversations, because this is not just the end, but it's only the beginning. And when I look around, I see that there's so much diversity, but at the same time, a lot of commonality in terms of thought. Everybody wants a better tomorrow. The other thing I noticed when Nicholas talked about Portuguese, my ancestry is actually Portuguese, even though I'm from India. You see, my last name is not really Indian, it's Portuguese, because the Portuguese ruled us. So to say what Julia said, we don't even know where we are from. We claim that we are from, but at the end of the day, I look at it as we're all God's children. We could be from a different place. So when my kids initially they went to private school, but when they went to public school, they came back one day and asked me, Dad, which part of India are we from? Because now in the public school, there were a lot more people of Indian origin. Until then, that question never arose. So my next steps are to have these conversations more and learn to listen a lot more, because I went to an African-American wedding once and they were talking about jumping the broom. I had no idea what that was until I asked them and they explained it to me. So every day is a learning curve when you learn to listen. And sometimes listening is not very easy for me, but I realize the only time I can learn is when I listen. So that's what I'm trying to take as a takeaway from this.
Okay, I would like to answer what was most meaningful, valuable to me in this conversation. And what I take away is that the United States it's not really one nation, but we're made up of many nations, we're many groups. We differentiate ourselves, or we are labeled in one way or another by ethnic groups, or by using hyphenated names such as Chinese Americans, African Americans, Native Americans, just like Donald said. However, if you go outside of America and you see other people, the way they see you is not as that hyphenated name. They see you as an American. So other people outside of America may not describe us the way we are being, described to here by the hyphen and, this or that. We're all Americans. So I think, as like Victor mentioned, we should really focus on our unique things that make us more alike, and not so much on our differences. Because after all, we're all here, we're all Americans, we're all trying to be the best we can and make this country the best we can for the future generations. So I think, as a takeaway, I mean, we really should focus on what makes us the one group, one nation, as opposed to what makes us different. I think we have more in common than we have in differences. So I wish we can continue going in that path.
Have we all gone? Has everyone gone? Okay, I guess I'm the last one. How has this conversation changed my perception of anyone in this group, including myself? I would say that this conversation has changed my perception of myself in the sense that I think I am a very good storyteller. I think I can tell my story. But where I would like to grow is being a story seeker and actively seeking out the stories of others. So I guess that's kind of a twofer, because it's kind of, how my perception changed, but also kind of my next step after this conversation is really thinking about seeking out these stories for myself, for our employees, the Fulton County employees, really developing ways that we can hear their stories and be kind of the one Fulton, right, that we aspire to be. So I think that's my takeaway. That's my reflection. All righty. So now we're time for participant reflections. And unfortunately, I was screen sharing, so I couldn't see any of the chat. I saw at different points where, like, I saw the chats popping up, but I couldn't read them. So for our participant reflections, I'll stop screen share and we'll be able to open it up to the participants. One thing that I do want to share, and this is just to protect the privacy of the participants that get into the sharing of the reflection. I only ask that you not share the reflection about anything in particular to the workplace. If you need to share those kind of personal things with me, you can definitely email me or connect with me offline, and we can definitely go one-on-one with that type of question or conversation. So for now, I will stop screen share and we'll open it up. Anyone on the panel, of course, can respond to any of the reflections. So the reflections that the participants will be responding to are one of the three. What was most meaningful and valuable to you in this conversation? What learning or new understanding or common ground did you find in this conversation of the topic? And is there a next step that you would like to take based on the conversation you heard? So those are our three, and I will stop screen share so that I can see the chat. Donald, do I need to do anything to open it up? Let's see, I don't know that I see.
You can. Well,
I see a few things in chat.
Yeah, you can invite them to. You can invite them the video if there anybody else. And let me ask them if there are any questions.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the participants?
Not so far. Anybody
I've
wants
got
to
one
share?
message. Okay.
Allison, if you're listening, you've been pretty active on the chat, so I was just wondering if you have any questions.
Oh, she says you answered a lot of
Re-
questions. Good stuff.
Rico says you answered a lot of good questions, good stuff.
Let's see, I do see one here. I think Victor may have actually answered this one already. Oh,
Well,
yeah,
Allison wanted to talk a little bit about race versus ethnicity.
Oh, yeah, so the distinction between the two. For the purposes of our conversation, we gave a series of definitions for race, and so there were quite a few to choose from. But I think even the video, the really good distinction for that is the origin of everything video. Dr. Bainbridge's video, if you haven't taken a look at it, does a wonderful job of going through the construction of race itself and really being able to give you the history of how that was developed. For the purposes of living room conversations, ethnicity is being defined as a cultural phenomenon. So it's more associated with some of the themes of the conversation from Victor and Nicholas when they were talking about what was associated with being a part of a particular group. So that's the broad line, but I would say if you have not seen the video, it does a great job of explaining the distinction between race as a social construction and then ethnicity. Let's see, it says, I was wondering about, this is from Allison again, I was wondering about the race versus ethnicity when I think this was this Victor speaking about the Black versus Puerto Rican, if that makes sense. Victor, do you recall?
Yes. Well, you know, like you said, it's a construct. The idea of, you know, race. I mean, people are going to identify. You know, Puerto Ricans, of course, in America are going to be Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, whatever you want to call them. They're going to be a separate group, even though within that group, you're going to have a rainbow of colors. My mom is Julia's complexion. My dad is a dark-skinned Black man. You know what I mean? I have uncles and aunts who are Donald's complexion, who are Puerto Rican. You know what I mean? And so within that, there's these other things, but again, it really does come down to, you know, here in America, this is one of the things that we seem to be really preoccupied with, the idea of creating a separation between groups, and, you know, and thus this is why when people, you know, come from other places to this country, they're always confused because they're wondering, how did I end up in a group that I don't even know anything about? You know what I mean? And, you know, and just because you're told you're a part of a group doesn't really make you a part of that group. You know, yeah. I've sat in classrooms with people from Jamaica who told me outright, I am not Black, I am Jamaican. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's, you know, it's just different, you know what I mean? Because they're not accustomed to the ways in which this country has made these things, you know, into like a reality, you know, and it's only our reality, but it is what we have to deal with as, you know, a country. But yeah, it's one of those things. My mom doesn't, you know, she's not Black, you know, she's not Black, you know, she's Puerto Rican and she's American, and, you know, she's a lot of other things. Does she have parts of her that are Native American? Does she have parts of her that may be African? Yeah, sure. You know, as I said, my family is pretty much a rainbow. So, you know, they're all of the above, and thus that's why I say I don't see any difference when I see them. You know what I mean? Nicholas is my brother, you know, though he's from the Dominican Republic and my family's from Puerto Rico. We're still brothers, you know what I mean? You know, in the same way, you know, again, I have my family, when we did our genealogy, we know exactly where we come from when it comes to, you know, the Spanish side. So I know where we come from in Spain. So, you know, if you're European, Julia, you're my sister. Todd, you're my brother. You know, so it's one of those kind of things. And I refuse to, like you said, I refuse to let people define, you know, who I am. So when people ask me, I'm gladly going to tell them I am Black and Puerto Rican, and I am proud of both, you know.
That's great. Donald, I did a swab, and well, actually, I didn't do it. My aunt. So we're from Nigeria.
You're my sister too. I'm from Nigeria.
I do know that.
DNA-wise, Nigeria.
Supposedly.
Let me tell you something very funny. You know, I got to tell you something very funny. My mom is pretty light skinned, and we were traveling to Mexico, and I filled up the the border said, "Why are you filling this?" And he tore up the form. "She's Mexican. She doesn't need this form." He thought she was Mexican. And I kept telling her she's Indian citizen. She's not even a U.S. citizen. He says, no, I don't believe you. She's Mexican. All because he looked at her face and she was lighter skinned than me. He wouldn't believe that she was my mom and that she was of Indian origin. And I said, now that you tore up the form, you better fill it in Spanish because she has to go back to America. We got to prove that she came to Mexico and is coming back legally into the United States. So what Julia said was very right. We don't even know where we are all from. Who knows?
And the
does it
forms.
really matter is the question at that point. Yes, and the forms.
We've got to get rid of this form.
And another time I had to tell people that India is in Asia because a lot of people thought, oh, Asians are only people from Japan and, Southeast Asia and not South Asians. So I had to even give a little bit of a geography lesson to some folks that we don't have a separate category. We come under the Asian category under the census forms because you're Indian.
The form should say, do you respect others?
Yes.
That's a good one.
Are you kind?
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Honest.
All right. Let's see.
Absolutely.
I'm looking through the chat here.
I like one.
Yeah, Allison just put, "Are you human?" I love it. There we
Are
go.
you
Human.
All
Oh my
some
God.
days, maybe not.
Bye-bye.
Yes, that one may not be able to be checked all the time.
It was very strange when I first decided to work in Fulton County. A lot of people who live in this side of 285 said, "Are you sure you want to work there?" I said, "What do you mean by that?" Because it's all about perception, because they always thought that Fulton County is predominantly African-American and, these folks were concerned. And I said, "What's the reason for concern? Do you have a basis?" And there was no basis. And I said, I've been happily working there now for 2.5 years. I said, I find them no different from any other person that I worked for in the last 30 odd years. It's all about your mind. And that's why I like the United College Negro Fund, which has a tagline that says the mind is a dangerous thing to waste. We limit ourselves by our mind, by what we think, what we perceive of others. We don't give ourselves a chance. That's why I tell people, you got to open up your mind. You got to have more conversations with people who don't look like you, who don't speak like you. That's when you realize how much learning that you will get.
Yeah,
I
very
agree.
profound.
Yeah, Nigel, you said we're having brave conversations, and I think a lot of people need to be courageous and have brave conversations, because fear gets in the way. It's a reaction and it shuts you down, and it's not a way to live without having these really good conversations so that you can grow. So I'm glad you said that, and that included that.
Yeah,
Right.
For me, it was really important because I knew because of everything that was going on, I wanted to introduce a structured conversation. And it took, researching, trying to find resources, but living room conversations is really, I have to give them like a total shout out. They're an open source organization. They provided the training and the format and structure for us to be able to introduce this and provide these skills. Because what I've learned is it's not that people don't want to have these conversations. Either they don't know how, and so it's scary because I just don't know how. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Or they're exhausted with the conversations because they've been having them forever. And they feel like, well, how am I going to get some kind of resolution or next step out of it? And so this structure, I think it creates the space for you to do that, to really think about, well, how can I take this conversation and move it to action? So it's not just me having conversation, but it's me actually making something happen because of it. So those, particularly the reflection questions for everyone here in the chat and for all of us, those are the big takeaways, because that's how we take this conversation and then move it forward and really turn it into something actionable. So I think we're nearing the end. We're right at 7:44. So if I don't see any more questions in the chat, don't see anything else here. So with that, I would ask that for everyone that's here, all the attendees on the call, please give us your feedback. We have the feedback forms there on the iTunes website. And if you can't find that website, let me know, because I just received a link from communications today. So I'm going to drop those in the chat once I get them, or once I get it. But please visit the iTunes website. Please give us your feedback. And I challenge you all to get with your family and friends and start your own living room conversations. And we have the link for living room conversations is also available on our site. So with that, do we have anything else from the group before we sign off?
Just thank you.
Alison had
This has been great.
Alison had a question. Will the slides be available?
Yes, we can put the slides. My plan is after each dialogue, we're going to put the presentation on the webpage so that every time we get off of every time we end the dialogue, they'll be made available there. So yes, definitely will for sure. Oh, look, Erica said looking forward to opening up dialogue. Awesome.
Great.
And I will give the feedback link too. So the good thing is I've got everybody here. I have your email accounts. So I can send you everything in email. And then for the future sessions, I can just drop them in chat. You're welcome. Well, all right, my friends, thank you for your creating this brave space and having this dialogue with me. I enjoyed this experience very much. And I will see you all again at the next dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay
Have
Have
a
a
safe
good
out there.
night. Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.